Hello and welcome to another talk on Girl Gamers Talk. A lot is going to happen this time as I am honored to be, I would love to say, superheroes in the gaming industry. An amazing number of panels taking place right here on this talk. So starting with, ladies and gentlemen, we have here an award-winning diversity and digital education pioneer who happens to be also the CEO of Women in Games. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Claire Isaaman, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here today.
Honor. We are blessed to have you in this talk. It's going to be a great one, definitely. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as well, we have here another personality who happens to be the Director of Inclusive Design and Product Development at Electronic Arts, who also happened to be working and worked at many companies like Sega and Square Enix, a speaker, a mentor, and many more. Ladies and gentlemen, Tulay McNally, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And ladies and gentlemen, we have here today at this panel who as well worked at a lot of big companies like Geo4 Nike, putting together game esports strategies and marketing strategies, also is a mentor, and at this point she works at Logitech, focused at developing a pro player program centered around esports and human performance. Ladies and gentlemen, Cary Lambert, hello. Hi,
happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure. All right, please, if you don't mind, starting with Mary Claire, a little bit about yourself and what you're passionate about when it comes to the gaming and the esports industry.
Yes, of course. I'm Mary Claire, as you've just told everyone, the CEO of Women in Games. And Women in Games is a not-for-profit organization that was founded in 2009. We are aligned to the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals 2030, and it's 17 goals. We are number 5, achieve gender equality and empower all girls and women. Our mission is to establish a gaming industry and culture and community free of discrimination, where full equity of opportunity, treatment and conditions empowers all girls and women from all ethnicities of all orientations to achieve their full potential in the games and esports industry. I engage and connect as much as possible across a range of gaming groups and channels. It's important for me to understand the zeitgeist, the changing landscapes within the sector, the good and the bad, the successes and the challenges. And it's important to me personally to encourage and support the gaming community where I can. We have a well-established and growing community of individual ambassadors, 500 currently, present in 52 countries. Along with 20 corporate ambassadors and some new founding education ambassadors. There are 6 at the moment, but we're planning to roll that out across Europe and then the rest of the world. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about Women in Games.
That is massive. Thank you so much. Very exciting things, definitely. And Cary, a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Cary. I have made esports my career. It's really been my passion since I got into competitive World of Warcraft a really long time ago, way before it was as special as it was now with the fancy race to world first. Loving esports, I wanted to make it my career. My foot in the door was really at Ubisoft, where I was leading community and player communication at Ubisoft for Rainbow Six Siege, the Pro League, the competitive league they have for that game. And my career eventually took me to Nike, where I led brand strategy on the brand innovation team and worked really closely with Nike research scientists to sort of understand what should Nike's entry into esports look like, which teams should we work with, and what was the purpose of Nike going to be in esports, and how could we support those players. Eventually moved over to G4, where I was temporarily before moving over to Logitech, where I am now, basically leading a esports player program focused on maturing the industry and really honing in on human performance and the capability of these players. And a passion of mine is understanding women competitive gamers and the differences between all genders when it comes to competitive video gaming. And I think this really is the first level playing ground that we've had in the sports space, especially when you think about you know, a lot of the conversations right now in the competitive sports space for women and for all genders. It really is, at least to me, one of the first level playing fields where men, women, non-binary, everyone can play together and sort of have that equal representation in the field. And I want to push that with everything that I do. So that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. Wow. That was really exciting to hear, definitely. Thank you so much, Cary. That was a pretty interesting journey you had there.
Yeah, it's been great.
Appreciate it. And Tulay, how are you? A little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about my career journey as well. Might be interesting for some to hear because I didn't come from a games background. I studied American cultural history and psychology in Munich.
Wow.
And I never thought I would actually find a job using my skills and my knowledge, which I do now, 20 years after I graduated. But my first career essentially took me to becoming a journalist and working as a video editor way back in the early 2000s. And somehow I ended up working in video games in the mid 2000s. First in localization, and then localization QA, and then project management, and then it took me essentially to EA, where I moved to Canada and worked at BioWare for 8 years, heading up central development operations, which included QA, QE, localization, interface with all the different publishing arms within EA and other teams. And 3 years ago, I moved back to Europe and worked at DICE as a senior development director in studio operations, focusing on things like studio culture, development processes, and people. And a year ago, I want to say, got a job that was unique at EA. So I was kind of the pioneer in that sense with EA leadership, where we created this new role called Director for Inclusive Design and Inclusive Product Development. And essentially my job is to work with all the studios across EA, including all the development partners like localization, legal, and so on, to ensure that our games are historically accurate, culturally sensitive, where people feel seen and represented authentically, and essentially something that is really grounded in the story. So we are doing a lot of consulting with the designers. So I work very closely with artists and designers and producers mostly. And recently, I joined a group at EA, which is called Positive Play. And Positive Play, as a broader term, is really looking after things such as disruptive behavior, or how to kind of combat those things, how to put systems in place to reduce toxicity in our games or make our players feel more safe. And there's, through existing research as well, how representation and inclusion are really intersectional with anything related to anti-toxicity.
Right.
So I'm working closely with that group essentially to figure out how we can best approach it strategically and work with all the different teams, both in the studio side and also technology side, how to make our player experiences more inclusive and positive for everyone.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. Again, I do feel that we assembled the Avengers here at this panel. Definitely. I mean, the pool of talents and experience in this panel itself is so rich. So again, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I guess we're going to go through some questions if you don't mind, starting with this one, with Mary Claire, if you don't mind. What do you think so far about the representation of different type of characters in games at this point, 2021 and before?
Okay, thank you. And I hope that what I'm about to say is not too controversial in any way, but I think characters in video games are still limited.
Hmm.
We have not yet reached the levels of complexity found in literature and moving image, and we don't have enough female characters. However, it's coming. But for instance, Women Forward and gaming-orientated company Feminist Frequency recorded the details of each E3 Expo from the years up to 2020.
Wow.
Particularly noting what games had female protagonists. Out of the 76 games that were showcased at E3 gaming conventions in LA in 2019, only 10% of those showcased included female protagonists in their story. So there are some wonderful female characters, but they're only a few. And I think it's with, when you have a fact like that, which is, based on looking at 76 games that are being showcased somewhere, I think that just tells you something. I think the other thing for me, in many ways, is I don't necessarily think of games as narrative-driven experiences. I think of them as playful experiences, and therefore, some of my favorite characters are anthropomorphic, for instance, and can be found in the worlds of Animal Crossing. In fact, I sometimes like games that have no characters at all. Many games are not narrative driven, not about male characters or female characters, but actually about the act and experience of play. One really beautiful creative game called Flower was made by that game company, which has been called Poetry in Motion. The game exploits the tension between urban and natural serenity, and players accumulate flower petals as the on-screen world swings between the pastoral and the chaotic. Like in the real world, everything you pick up causes the environment to change. It's a game that immerses you in the poetic beauty and serenity of nature. And there's so much potential diversity for creative games. And I think that's what we need to keep striving for, because often people say to me, what are your favorite female characters when they're talking to me about games? And so I suppose what I'm trying to say here is that I don't see games like that. I don't see them just as based on characters. I think there's so much more diversity of thinking, diversity of creativity, diversity of play that games actually represent.
Wow, you got your facts together right there. Definitely. So if I may follow up with a question for you right now. You said 76 games and only 10% had protagonists who happened to be women. Yes. I mean, did you really reach to a certain, I would say, why is that the case? Did you get some kind of I don't know, comment or answer to that?
Well, Feminist Frequency don't give an answer, and Wire did some work with them on this. So they don't try and give an answer. They just try to give the facts. Right. But I think it is an interesting question, and I think there are a lot of interesting questions like that in the sector, which we don't actually have the data or answers for. So, I mean, one of the things that we're doing at the moment at Women in Games, because we work with quite a lot of research organizations, we're looking at trying to get this kind of information and data together, and then ask the very questions that that you've just posed to me. I think it shows a lack of imagination in many ways, if that's the case, or it perhaps shows that games are made with a particular audience in mind. So even though we are trying to diversify the industry, perhaps some game makers, I'm not saying everyone, some studios are still not thinking about that fully enough. I mean, I think what Tulay was saying earlier about her journey and the things that she's doing inside EA are really fascinating to me, and they seem like exactly the right things to be doing at this moment in time, and exactly the right things to really diversify and progress our wonderful sector, because we have the games and esports industries have still so much to offer. You know, we're a young, compared to other entertainment industries, we're the youngest, and we're still learning a lot of things as we go along, and we're still learning a lot about the technology that we're using and how we use it and how we use it creatively. And you know, and I think it's actually a very, very exciting time, providing I think that we bear all these things in mind. And you know, we do need to get the 10%. That, you know, if that's, well, that is correct. You know, 76 games that are being showcased, only 10%, you know, included those female protagonists. So you know, we do need to do something about that. And I think studios are, and that I was really, you know, again, you know, what Tulay was saying. I mean, that when I hear things like that, I feel really positive about what's coming. You know, what's coming next.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I can only imagine the amount of work that went behind the stats, the numbers, and all of that. That, like, all the E3 and 76 games. And thank you so much. Appreciate that. And now to
that's
Cary.
What I do.
Thanks. Cary, now to you. Same question, but I would say more into the esport field, the representation of different type of characters in games. What do you think of that?
Sorry, I was muted. For esports, I think it's less about the character that you're playing. So it's a when you're competing in a video game, usually, let's take Rainbow Six Siege, for example, because I worked on that game for a while. The operator that you choose is actually part of a larger strategy. So you're not choosing to play a character to represent yourself or to play through that character. The character is really a tool for you to utilize so you can, you know, complete your objective, which is hopefully win the map. Same in a bunch of other competitive games like League of Legends, for example. You choose your champion based on your lane of choice and things like this. And so it's less about, when we speak about actual characters, it's less about when you're playing competitively, you know, wanting to, you know, feel like you connect with that character. But I do think that there are ways for companies that make competitive games to be more inclusive in the characters that they create. For example, Ubisoft has committed to having, when they release new operators, a male and female operator, you know, release at the same time, typically, to make sure that there is an equal balance of at least two genders. I think you know, my challenge would be, can we include more non-binary operators and, you know, look outside of you know, your typical two gender scope. But you know, I think it's still it's still something great that they've committed to. But in esports, the character that you play is less important. I think when you think in broad terms of representation of who are playing those characters at the top level, unfortunately, we do not see you know, women and other genders represented as much as I would hope, and we can talk about that probably later on in the panel. But
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And now to Tulay, what do you think?
I mean, I obviously agree with everything that everyone else has said before me. But I think one thing I wanted to add is the way I look at it, or we are trying to promote it in my company, is really, if you or anyone here who is listening has ever done like an diversity or inclusion training or anything, some of you may be familiar with the concept of the iceberg. And there are things that you see with the visible eye, and then tons of things that are below the waterline that you can't see. And typically the things that we can see are gender, age, maybe body diversity. So those are the things when we look at games, we kind of say, okay, is it male, female? But there's just so much below the waterline that we also need to consider when we talk about inclusion or representation, such as how are we representing mental health? What about accessibility? How are we designing our games to be respectful to different ethnicities or cultures or languages, or you know, some questions we have, for example, is with regards to voice acting. When we are casting a voice actor who's, for example, African American, and we are choosing a white actor because we can't find the talent to match the actual physical representation of the character.
Right.
Is that okay or not? And if we all agree it's not okay, then what can we do to maybe promote more talent to become voice actors or become go into mocap and actual acting, and not just voice acting, but actually acting. So there's just like a lack of talent that we're all discovering as we are talking and thinking more about these things that we just need to tackle as an industry. And one thing, to the point of the non-binary, we were just discovering there are a lot of complexities just from a linguistic point of view as well. And there's a lot of complexities from a geopolitical point of view, where in some countries, they don't recognize that they are technically more than two, like male and female. So how are you navigating from a social responsibility point of view when you're marketing the game, or when you are promoting a character who is, for example, non-binary or gay, when in certain countries those things just don't exist? How do you deal with that social responsibility, and how are you tying those decisions into your corporate values? So I think there are just like bigger discussions that are happening and that will have to happen industry-wide. And I hope that as an industry, we can really put some pressure on in certain areas in the world and really make a positive impact outside of our games as well.
Wow. I would like to add something. As me, I work for Bahrain TV as well at the same time, and I am involved in the gaming industry. So when certain games came out to the market, and they were asking me and others, like, so the character is, from a certain gender and represents a certain orientation. Is it okay for us to release the game in the market? And I was like, I don't know what to say. I really don't know what to say, because you have the ministry for one side and you have the public on the other side, and there is a huge demand for the game. So I can only imagine, like, for me, a person who's an outsider, but a little bit, working for the Ministry of Information and the media and the gaming and all that taking place, I'm just like out there and just like, I can only give you a comment, but I can only imagine to like what you have to go through where you are involved in the industry. So has that been challenging, like in that sort?
I want to say it's a very new area where we are trying to understand how to best navigate. What I would love to see is that we tackle some of these things industry-wide, where, for example, when it comes to more inclusive language and language standards, and specifically in this area, as a localization community, I would love the community to come together and create common style guides, for example, because I think having common style guides and how you're referring to certain things will also improve the player experience, because then things are not translated or treated differently from game to game, and it doesn't really matter if it's Ubisoft or EA or Activision or someone else. In the end, it's just like all for the player. So I would just love to see, and I think it will just like come with time as we're talking more, and especially like with panels like this, and maybe GDC as a good forum where we're really tackling, let's organize ourselves as an industry, get together and tackle this. So from a localization point of view, I'm trying to push the people I know to organize themselves and figure it out as a community, but there are probably other areas where we can get together and standardize things.
Wow.
Standardize in the best interest of the player. Yeah, what needs to be standardized.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tulay. It was very interesting. So back to Mary Claire. Now, from your perspective, now when it comes to diversity in games, what do you think of that? I mean, are we lacking? Are we okay? Are we on the right path from your perspective?
Okay, from my perspective, it's become complex because the more the subject of diversity and inclusion progresses, the more there is to consider. And that's obviously just been discussed with what, Tulay has been laying out. But, I'm the CEO of Women in Games, so that is always at the forefront for me. So I just want to give an example here. So, if 50% of the population approximately is female, 50% of players across the globe are female. Globally, on average, 23% of women work in the games industry. Gender balance in the executive teams of the top 14 global games companies in 2020 the stat is 84% men, 16% women. So, you know, I think that tells you something as well, because there's a 50-50 split, and then suddenly there's a different kind of split. And I think that says something about, you know, the leaders in organizations and what they do and how they progress some of this or not. I also think, and I just wanted to say, because this has been, you know, this has been raised a couple of times by the other panelists, but within the 50% of women, there is also intersectionality. So there's race, ethnicity, age, national origin, sexual orientation, cultural identity, assigned sex, gender identity. And that's a starting group, quite a common starting group. But I was recently reading something by an organization called Built-In that actually suggests there are 34 types of diversity definitions, you know, to add to the ones that I've just read out. And they call them common individual differences, and say that the number of factors that define diversity is truly unlimited. And throughout an individual's life, the unique biological and genetic predispositions, experience and education alter who they are as a person. These nature-nurture interactions are what diversifies and evolves the human race, allowing individuals to connect and learn from each other's differences. So I think, you know, when you start to unpack that, and the more that we're unpacking it, the world is unpacking all this, it's not just the games industry, the more complex it's getting. So dealing with that complexity, you know, it does actually have some real challenges. And you know, I think what Tulay was saying earlier demonstrates those kind of challenges, and especially when you have products that are global. And I think the idea of the industry coming together, a star guide, a language, I think in order to deal with all these complexities, that is exactly what we need to do, you know, moving forward, because otherwise there can be so many misunderstandings, and you know, that's what we don't want, because we see, and we have seen already in the last year, you know, across society, what those misunderstandings mean, and how they can also get out of control. So I feel genuinely we have to try and create a framework for this, and have some really genuine and open discussions about what that framework is, to you know, to make sure that we go forward in the right direction.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You know, even to add more on that, coming from the Middle East and working in the gaming industry and esports as well, between Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, I can see right now there is now way more focus on female and women players and people in the industry. Like in the Middle East itself right now, most of the representatives of companies, whether it's Sony, PlayStation, Ubisoft, Project CD, Activision, are actually females and women. Most of them, all the big decision makers right now in the UAE. And the same thing in Bahrain right now. When it comes to esports right now, we have a Bahraini representative for a Brazilian esport company, who her name is Noof and happens to be a girl. So it's what's amazing right now, seems happening in the Middle East, that most of the people who are holding positions and pretty much representing the gaming industry and esports, there are more, we're having the split 50-50. But we can see there is more interest from the side, in the sense that there are more female and women representatives than even male, which is very interesting. And we see that the change, how it's different and how things are just coming together. So interesting times, I would say, Mary Claire, definitely.
Yes, I agree. And I think that you know, if you look at it globally, there are some areas that are advancing very rapidly. And in many ways, I think if I think of the UK and I think of Europe, I think we're not progressing as rapidly. And some of the stats that I have show that we're not. In fact, a couple of stats I have, and I don't want to keep reading stats out, but they demonstrate that we're going backwards. Yeah.
A question actually for you, do you think that has anything to do with COVID, that a lot of people are just like trying to reassess their career and their point in life, and discover that maybe the, you know, gaming culture or the crunch culture is maybe not what they want? Do you think that has an impact on the lack of women in Europe?
That is very interesting.
Yes, I mean, I think COVID has had a big impact because, again, there's a lot of evidence to show that not just in the games industry, but in the games industry too, the impact of COVID on women has been really extreme. And that is primarily, I think, because women have also had to hold down households, have had to, in lockdowns, they've had to educate children, and that responsibility has fallen on women. And, you know, I think that could be the case. I also think that here in the UK, we had a gender reporting process, a gender pay gap reporting process, and that was stalled last year because of COVID. And actually, we were progressing through that because, you know, it's sad to say, but because you know, this is an enforced report that the government are enforcing on companies. But in fact, what it did was it made companies really look at what they were doing. And the first results of the gender pay gap reporting in the UK for the games industry was not very good. And then the year of reporting in 2019, there was an improvement. And actually, as CEO of Women in Games, I saw a lot more companies coming to me to seek advice and to talk about what they could do within their organizations. But this year, with COVID, that being stalled, I do feel that has slipped and potentially has slipped off the radar. So we're trying at the moment, Tulay, to do some work on that to try and understand it a bit better. And we have a Women in Games festival coming up in September, which contains a conference. And one of the areas in the conference we'll be focusing on will be around the effects of COVID on the sector, and particularly for women working in the sector. Yeah.
So thanks for doing that. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah,
definitely. And thank you, Tulay, for that question. Actually, it was a very interesting question. And of course, best of luck for the festival. I'm looking forward to that, definitely. To follow up with another question, if you don't mind, how was the reception when all these companies came seeking for advice? How was the reception?
What, from them with my advice, or
yeah?
It's generally very positive. Because for a company to decide to come to Women in Games, they've already made a decision that they want to learn something, or they want knowledge, or they want a particular kind of partnership. So, you know, that is a very positive experience. And we are, as an organization, we are seeing, you know, we are seeing more of that. And I think that, you know, one of the things that as CEO of Women in Games that I try to do is when I'm working with different organizations, I try to work in a very bespoke way, because you have different size organizations. You know, you have small indie studios, you have mid-sized studios, you have the big studios. So you have very different kind of structures and frameworks. And I think that sometimes what I see that can happen in very, very big organizations, you know, Tulay, like EA, is that there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of structure in those organizations. There has to be, because they're so big. But I think I'm picking that and then trying to work your way through and around, and how you become, you know, how you approach some of these challenges. It is complex. At the moment, we're working with the ISFE, so the Interactive Software Federation of Europe, to produce a Women in Games guide, which is the second edition of a guide that we previously produced. And we hope that when that is published, that will be useful for you know, many organizations of all different sizes, just to help them support things, to support the work that they're doing. So I would say that on the whole, I think there is a spirit for change, but it has to be led from the top. It has to be led from the top. I think a lot of this, particularly in the bigger companies. And if you remember the stat that I gave you earlier about, you know, the top 14 global gaming companies, with 84% of men in the top tier and only 16% of women, then, you know, you have to think, well, what is driving the vision of that organization? What is driving that company and the work that they're doing? So, you know, what I see sometimes is all diversity and inclusion work gets stuck in the middle of a company. So it can get stuck in the middle. It's not being driven from the top, and a lot of ideas and perspectives from the bottom end are not filtering up either, or they're filtering to the middle, but they're not getting any higher than that. So, you know, I think there's work to be done on the ways in which organizations and companies can work together, men and women, to resolve some of these challenges. It's happening though. It is happening. I mean, it's definitely positive. That's all I can say. But there are still challenges. There are still areas that are sticky.
Well, you did say the word positive.
Yeah. Because I think what you are saying with like change has to come from the top. I think, as an example, we had the work that I do right now, and we used to have something we call the inclusion framework, and we still use it in the way, but related to the product. And that was a grassroots initiative where we had all the people who already have their day jobs were doing this because they're really passionate about the topic.
Yeah.
And it took us a while, and it took, I guess, all the events of the last 18 months as well to really catapult that this topic is super important and we need to prioritize this as a company. But it also needed, you know, a CEO like Laura Mehle, who really cares about this topic, who can elevate this to listen and then say, this is a full-time job. This needs dedicated effort through a person or a group, because otherwise we're just like going to do tiny progress, but we are not going to make radical progress. So I think there's like a grassroots thing, great, but really radical change that we need right now, that really needs to come from the top. It has to be modeled, and anything needs to be anchored in those business goals, and someone also needs to track them to make sure that we are reaching them.
That's it. No, it's really a strategic level, and that you're absolutely right. And there is so much wonderful grassroots work going on. I mean, Women in Games was a grassroots organisation when it started in 2009, and you know, that is wonderful to see. But you're absolutely right, and you know, thank you for that explanation as well here on that panel to support what I'm saying. I appreciate that.
Such an eye-opener, honestly, such an eye-opener. Right now, we'd like to hear from Cary right now. As we talked a little bit in the gaming industry, what's happening over there. What about esports? You've been mentoring and speaking to a lot of players, and a lot of them had to be girl gamers themselves, and you had to do a lot of talks in supporting them. And as you said, you know, doing work centered around esports and human performance. Where do you see we're at that when it comes to the diversity? Are we lacking? Are we okay? Do we need more work? What do you think?
I think we're still incredibly lacking, you know, and hopefully not a controversial statement or surprising to anyone in regards to women representative at the highest level. Of course, I don't know if this was in our chat beforehand or something that I said already recorded, but we are growing, and I think it is getting better. But when you think about, let's say, tier 1 esports, and not only tier 1 esports, but tier 1 programs within those esports. So let's take, you know, League of Legends, for example. When you look inside of LCS, LPL, LCK, there's no women representation on these teams, but there are women competitors. So it's hard to give a number or percentage of how many esports players are women, because you'd have to break it down by the level that they're playing at and the leagues that they're playing in, the teams they're on, etc. And there are a lot of reasons for this. And I was thinking in my head as you guys were just talking about how it has to come from the top. I think it's actually really interesting in esports, where we have a lot of support from organizations who are creating summer camps that are, you know, inclusive and targeted at women. And we have a lot of teams that are being created just for women. But I think the real problem, or one of the largest problems in esports, actually comes from what I would call sort of the toxic tier 2, tier 3 areas, where let's let's just like talking about how like esports teams get created and how women join teams. There's the average player that's just playing and they find that they're really good at the game. They start climbing the ladder and then they say to themselves, look, I'm good enough to pursue this as a career. I'm good enough. I want to get into the esports space. And so what they do is you know, what the natural progression, let's say for a male player, is to look for other teams and to look for positions on these teams and join them and sort of compete at the tier 2, tier 3 level. What's happening here is, unfortunately, that's the group that has the most toxic community and the most toxic player base, and they're not actively inviting women to be on these teams, or I would say anyone outside of the male gender to be on these teams. And so they're having to form teams together. And women. And so women are playing on women only teams, they're competing in women only leagues, and they sort of get filtered into, you know, women only tournaments. And they're not, unfortunately, they're not playing against people of, you know, the skill level that you find on these all male teams, because they're being forced to be separated. It's not that women aren't as good as men, it's they're being forced into this other space where they're actually, you know, not, and these male teams won't scrim against these female teams because they're not seen as good, and so they're not getting the experience they need to really grow. And that's why you see a dichotomy of skill. It starts at this toxic tier 2, tier 3 level. When I think about what can be done to change that, you know, because there's of course a ton of programs going on to sort of battle toxicity, but these esports communities are so tight knit and so niche. Something that I think about is tournament organizers and publishers and developers who put on these tournaments and third party, you know, would be to start asking or to start requiring like one team out of, let's say there's 8 qualifying teams, to be a multi-gendered team. And that would encourage people at the tier 2 and the tier 3 level to invite women to their team, because they would see that, like, you know, hey, if we have it's one spot that we're competing for, you know, let's like try to go after that one spot and not compete against like the tier 1 teams for the 7 other spots. This one might seem more achievable, and it encourages, you know, women to be invited to these multi-gendered teams. And I think we have to start seeing that and stop separating to sort of have the same level of skill growth between men and women in the space and knowledge on all genders.
Thank you so much for that answer. If I may follow up with another question, if you don't mind. Now, you've been talking about the career base for the players, but what about the workplace as well? I mean, is that something that as well is facing the same kind of issues with players, or are we seeing a different thing going on at the workplace?
Well, you know, I feel like the stats that Mary Claire gave most likely probably dip into the esports space. And, you know, I don't have any specific stats on me right now of just, you know, women employed in the esports space, but I am seeing, you know, like strides in that space, at least to the organizations that I've been privileged to work at. Of course, you know, there needs to be more representation. So like Tulay was talking about, the more women at the grassroots level that are pushing for things like I just described, like maybe a one team in a qualifying bracket of 8, you know, like more women pushing for something like that. And men can push for these things as well, and, you know, people of all genders. But you know, the more women we have at the grassroots level, I think the better. And it is improving. You know, I find myself, I would say, you know, I've been on the job for 10 years, and over the past, you know, I would say 3 to 5 years, there have been more phases like mine in meetings, and that always feels good. So we're definitely on the right track.
This is amazing. This is amazing. I mean, everything we heard so far at the panel has been just such an exciting, yet an eye-opener in so many levels. Unfortunately, I think we perhaps have to end this conversation in an exciting way, definitely. So if I may start with Tulay, any last words, if you don't mind?
Yes, in terms of last words, I think one thing I want to say to close this with the diversity in gaming thought. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm doing mentoring and I'm participating in these panels is that I feel like I want to reach people in an age where they can still make decisions about entering the gaming industry. Because when I started, for example, I said I have studied something that I didn't know where I will end up with what I studied. But I also didn't know that what kind of jobs exist in the games industry. So I think I appreciate that you guys are organizing this panel, and I would like to see more of these things so that especially women or other minorities see you don't have to be a programmer or an artist or a game designer to get a job. There's plenty of different kinds of jobs and plenty of jobs that don't exist today. So keep pushing, keep play esports, and maybe that's your way into development at some point. So there's plenty of ways to get into gaming, and just like keep informing yourself.
All right, thank you so much. Much appreciated. Mary Claire.
Needed to unmute myself there. Okay, I feel like I've said quite a lot already, but I think it could just end on something quite short, which is that there's definitely not a lack of diversity in the world. We know that, but it is the inequality and lack of opportunity, as well as socioeconomic barriers, that holds people back. So that's what I think we need to be addressing in order to create a fair playing field. And I think that, you know, it's so heartening for me to hear the knowledge, experience, and the work that Cary is doing, to hear about what Tulay is saying about the work that she's doing within EAA and how they're working together with teams and how they're doing stuff at grassroots. I mean, this is all really heartening to me, because I know that through all this work that these amazing women in the sector are doing, that it is going to change. It really is going to change. And I really believe that we are stronger together. And, you know, I'm even sitting here now thinking how pleased I am to have met you all this evening. And I've been thinking about all the different ways that we could have another conversation and think about things that we can do for the sector. So I'll just leave it on that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And Cary.
Yeah.
Last words.
Some last words. So words that I think about often in my space is one of my heroes and someone that I look up to, Sally Ride, who is one of the first she was the first female astronaut for America in space. And she used to say that zero gravity was the great equalizer, because she would get asked in interviews a lot. You know, what's it like being a woman in space? And, you know, do you feel like you're at a disadvantage to your male counterparts? And zero gravity sort of took care of all of that. And I think about that a lot in esports. I sort of think the screen is the great equalizer. And so my parting words would be just to any, you know, women athletes out there who are thinking about getting into esports, don't let anyone tell you that because you're a woman or because you're non-male that you have a disadvantage at video games. Absolutely isn't true. And, you know, whether or not you want to pursue like all female esports and feel more comfortable in an environment, or whether you want to break through the barriers of the tier 1, you know, like really, you know, fancy high, esports, go ahead and do that. And don't let anyone tell you that, you know, just based on your gender or your race or your sexual identity, etc., that, you know, you're at a disadvantage, because the screen is the great equalizer. So.
Wow, love it. Thank you so much. This has been an honor, definitely being with such highly intelligent and experienced and talented personalities like Cary, Mary Claire, and Tulay. Such an honor. And again, superheroes, knowing that we have you on board right here on the gaming and esport world and the world itself, we can definitely say the world's gonna be definitely a better place. Thank you so much for being part of this talk. And viewers around the world, thank you so much for tuning in. Yet another talk of Girl Gamer Talks. Thank you so much, and see you in another session.